Hey, it's great to be with everybody today. I wish I could be there in person. So, at Devex World, we're going to hear a lot about localization, and that's a good thing. There have been a lot of goals set and some met, but a lot not. And people will point to complexity and compliance and capacity as hurdles. But I think there's another one, and I think it's bias in the way we've represented the countries and communities that we serve. So, do me a favor, think of a word you would use to describe or define yourself, a single word. A lot of people pick curious or empathetic or ambitious. And it's surprising to me, nobody says poor, vulnerable, disenfranchised, marginalized. Because in our world, that's how we define people on a daily basis. And this quote really talks about the importance of that we've got the power to make the stories that we tell the definitive stories of people. And that's a tremendous amount of responsibility. So back to that comment on localization, I think that there's a direct link between narrative and the adoption of a more local approach. And I'm going to tell you why. I think we need to recast the story from featuring beneficiaries telling their stories to willing advocates giving their advice and guidance. That'll shift internal bias that we might have. It'll also do something to engagement of communities in program design, because it'll change the perception within organizations, of boards, of staff, on the capability of communities to be co-creators. And when we do that, we're going to look at who gets funded, what gets funded, and how it gets funded very differently. The result should be greater impact and greater equity. And you might be asking, what is a middle-aged white guy doing talking about representation? For me, it's personal. I graduated high school in 1984, and I knew that I was gay. I was terrified. I didn't know what it meant. So I looked to the press, and this was the story told about me, not by me. And the story that I heard was I probably wouldn't live. If I did, I wouldn't amount to much, and I certainly wouldn't be very well liked. Beyond that, though, the more important thing is it had a direct impact on policy. Narratives create biases and influence policies, and those have real consequences for people. And if you think of Reagan-era policies or the delay and lack of those for HIV care, treatment, research, you can tie it back to harmful narratives. Another thing happened in 1984 that I think cemented the view much of the world has on aid, poverty in Africa. This song, Do They Know It's Christmas Time, was Bob Geldoff's call for attention to the famine in Ethiopia. He even went on later to say, I'm responsible for two of the worst songs in history, this and We Are the World. So let's pay attention to the lyrics for a second. The greatest gift they'll get is life. Nothing in Africa ever grows, no rain or rivers flow. Tonight, thank God it's them instead of you, and the Christmas bells they hear are the clanging chimes of doom. And the most colonial of all, feed the world. And this has me wondering, what if Ethiopians had controlled the narrative? What would the policies have looked like? Would it have been grain and rice tossed out of planes? I think it would be much different. But that was then. What's happening today? So here are some headlines from the past 10 to 15 years. And if you think about the move to localization or engagement in design by countries, and then you look at the headlines, why would you? If it's corruption, war, rape, ruin, we're still telling a single story, and it's a harmful one. And even today, COVAX, which is doing great work, is a product of narrative and representation. If we had perceived and depicted countries differently, we would have invested in technology. Countries would be in also production facilities. Countries would be producing their own vaccines within their borders and not waiting at the back of the line for when wealthy countries are done with theirs. Now, I've made my own mistakes, and I've made lots of them, probably every mistake in the book. And it's interesting because I know the sting of harmful narratives. Why did I do that for decades in my work? And I've got a couple of theories, but here's a single one, me and a magazine I produced looking like a white savior. So we're causing unintentional harm. This is a website of an organization that just happens to work on immunization, mainly in Africa. But it's really a representation of every website in health and development. I'm going to walk through the images and what they tell us. One is an unnamed Black girl. Two, a bunch of unnamed Black kids running in a field. Three, Bill Gates. He's turned into art. He has a big quote, a title, and a name. Number four, an unnamed nurse or doctor. And number five, a very happy mother with kids. And so what this is saying to us is some people are worth listening to, Bill, and some people aren't, everyone else on the page. So why do we mute the people that we serve? These are three theories I have. Weirdly, we've only seen one approach. This, and I go back to my own mistakes, and it's the only approach that I ever saw. Also, implicit bias. I know I've had that, certainly. And then we're loyal to the places that we work instead of the people we serve. And that creates a very different motivation. So there's a change that can happen, and it requires a shift in perception. Right now, we approach the world from a we know perspective. We know best, we have the strategies, we have the solutions. And then it makes sense you would mute people you serve because your voice matters more. If we switch to we listen best to communities, then it makes sense you would elevate the voice of communities because you're building strategies together, you're following their lead. But we don't do that enough. The other thing that we don't do is we've been asking the wrong people the wrong questions. We've been asking beneficiaries for their stories, which are generally performative, when we should ask willing advocates for their advice and guidance. And I'll get into what that looks like in practical terms. So if you want to start today, there are a couple things you can do. You can reset consent, ask people if they want to be represented and how and what they want to say. You can hand people the mic and the camera, let them control their own image. You can get rid of harmful words that create the single story of people that's just inaccurate. And you can market that ability to listen. And so here's what a typical we know best approach looks like. We've got an unnamed young person and then a gratitude message, him basically thanking the organization for saving his life. This is a we listen best approach. He's named, he's got a title, he gives his advice, and then below it, the organization says we're following his advice. We're adding social workers who understand young people, and we're co-designing shelters with youth. So I think this organizational approach looks a lot smarter than the previous one. So back to that website, again, immunization on a global scale, maybe focused on Africa more than other regions. Here's what it looks like today, and here's what it could look like. Image number one is now President Ramaphosa, the president of South Africa, who's also leading the African response to COVID. He's giving his advice. And then we've got a married couple giving their advice and guidance. Bill's got his real estate because he deserves that. And the doctor or nurse has her voice too. So in this view, everybody's contributing and everyone looks smart. The last image that I'll show is a depiction of two different photos taken at the US-Mexico border. The woman with kids was taken by the Washington Post. The single image of the woman was taken by the New York Times. And that journalist set up her camera and simply let people take their self-portraits. So she's in control of her own image, and she looks dignified. She does not look pathetic, and it sets a very different tone for what migrants and immigrants look like. If you're a nonprofit, a funder, consultant, and you're seeing this, there are things that you can do. Changing your practice really matter, and you can start today. And we're never going to get to that true localization push if we don't change how we represent, depict, and perceive countries and communities. So that change really matters. And the beauty about changing the representation is most of this can be done in-house within an organization without a lot of permission. So we can start today, and I hope you will. Thank you for giving me the time.